Hi, Paula, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
I'm good. I'm a little sleep deprived with my baby, but I'm really grateful to be here for sure.
Mm, beautiful. You're currently based in Texas, but that's not where you originally come from, as I understand it. You're from
Yes,
Colombia.
yes,
It is
born and
funny
raised.
though. Earlier today, actually, I had another interview with also a woman in Texas. So that's a bit funny because usually it's always like all over the world, but today it's been a theme. It's been a
A theme,
theme,
Texas
birthing.
theme,
Yes.
birthing in Texas.
Yes. So, I'm very curious, obviously, to hear your journey. And it's
Mhm.
going to be uniquely yours and, what influenced that. And, you've had two babas and they obviously had two different kind of birth stories, and we'll dive into both. So let's go back to becoming pregnant the first time.
Mhm.
Was that consciously called in by
It was,
you?
yeah, it was consciously. I guess, by medical books, was late in pregnancy, meaning I was in my the second half of my 30s. And I, for a long time, did not want to have kids and had been very resistant to the idea and very pushed back against it. And then um, as I got older and especially having found a partner that I felt like I could raise kids with, like, feeling like, oh, like this feels different than, with all of my previous partners. And so I started opening up to the idea. And yet it still felt very daunting to, okay, now I'm going to change my life forever. Let's, let's get pregnant. Like, I'm an artist, and one of the things that really scared me at the beginning, it was what was going to happen to my work, what was going to happen to my
Mm.
identity, specifically in the work that I do, which is community-based work and activist work, where I used to travel around the world and work in different communities, and it. I just didn't know what was going to happen to my identity as an artist and to all the work that I had been doing over the past decade or so. And so I couldn't just make the choice, okay, let's get pregnant. And so I talked to a friend and she was like, well, what we did was stop trying not to have kids. And that was super helpful. So we just like stopped using contraception, but weren't trying actively to get pregnant. And that was really helpful, I think, for us. But the one thing that was very conscious for me, I'm a very spiritual person. I'm very grounded in ancestral practices from Colombia, from what is currently known as Colombia. And I had this moment. We happened to be in Europe, well, when we made this decision. And we were in Thessaloniki in Greece, and I was standing in front of the ocean, and I just had this moment where I put my hands in my womb and I talked to Mother Earth and to the water and said, "My body's ready, my spirit is ready. If this is meant to be for me in this life, I need you to intercede for me, and I'm asking for your help to bring me a child if this is for me." And I got pregnant the next month, like the next cycle. And so it was really powerful for me to have had that experience and to call a child consciously in that way, and then to have that materialize immediately. So it was very powerful to get
Wow,
pregnant in that way.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And so when you did become pregnant, what was your
Mhm.
relationship to birth?
Yeah, that's so as many of the women that come on your podcast, all the birth around me in terms of like my mom and cousins and aunts, like everyone just had a hospital birth. I mean, both me and my brother were C-section babies. My mom was not even allowed to really labor. I mean, it was just, we were born in the 80s. And so it's at that time in Colombia, I was just, that's just what you did. Like most people just did that. Like,
Wow.
so that I had that history, but then, I had been living here in the border for a few years, and there's a midwifery school here in El Paso. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of the circles, and I work a lot with women in different settings. And at the time, I was working a lot with survivors of domestic violence, and then I did a performance action intervention that braided women's hair across the international border crossing during the inauguration of Trump's presidency. And so I did that with a friend of mine. And so through all that work, I met some midwives and I met some doulas. And so I started being really curious about what this natural birth community was and what it was like. And again, me curious from the perspective of I'm interested in women and women's life and women's power to make their own decisions. I was not at the time thinking about me having kids at all. So then when I became pregnant, I had already had this experience with meeting some midwives and doulas, and some of my dear friends were in the birth work community. And so I was like, that's what I'm going to do. Because I've never been, I mean, I shouldn't say never, but for a long time, so at least 20 years, I've been very weary of the allopathic traditional medicine, or traditional meaning, what has become the norm in Western culture. And I work one of my big guides and mentors, and I feel like kind of magas in my life is my aunt. And she is a homeopath doctor and alternative holistic medicine practitioner. And so she has been always kind of the person I kind of reach out to when I feel kind of lost in the medical work. Because, anytime that I sneezed, my mom would just give me a pill, like that's the kind of upbringing and relationship to medicine. So I've, for a long time, been kind of very distancing myself from that kind of medical model and finding other ways of healing and nurturing myself. And so it just made sense at that point. Like I didn't even consider a hospital birth. I was like, well, of course I'm going to birth at a birthing center, of course, or have a home birth. I mean, of course I'm going to, not be in a hospital because I just didn't like that environment to begin with. And so I visited at that time, there were 3 birth centers in town, and I visited all 3 of them, then decided which one we wanted to go with. And throughout the process, we had the choice of deciding birth center or home. And we finally just decided that home birth was what we wanted to do. So that's, it was from the beginning something that was in my radar and that I wanted to try, even though I didn't really have a lot of history in terms of my family and, past life of anyone doing this. Like my mom was totally freaked out about it. And yeah, so that's what how I decided, and the timing of the pregnancy coincided with me working on my MFA thesis. So I did a Master of Fine Arts, and when I was working on my thesis, I was going to do a lot of field work in Colombia because my work was focused on territory and land and connection to ancestry through territory. And so I found out I was pregnant the week before I was going to leave to spend 6 months in Colombia. And so everything changed. And I did most of my prenatal care there. But I found a great midwife to work with there, and a doula that did prenatal massages. And I still went to a couple of obstetricians at my mom's pleading. But I went to obstetricians that were very pro natural birth, and they were suggested by the midwife I was working with. So I was kind of trying to navigate being in the space, because when I'm here, I'm kind of like, because my entire family is still in Colombia. And so I'm a little bit kind of protected in a way from the way that I was expected to birth and raise my kids because of the distance.
Yes.
But in that moment in time, I was the first, time pregnant mama, and I was kind of right in the middle of everything I grew up in that I had been distancing myself from. So it was kind of this dance of how to do what I wanted, and at the same time, have my mom also have some peace of mind, but in a way that was not intruding on what I wanted.
Yeah.
So
it's tricky when we're deep in the family, in that soup of it's just the vortex is so strong, and it's so much easier when we are like physically removed to truly feel ourselves, right?
Yeah.
But it's also that is where true healing can happen, though, is actually being in the deep vortex of like their opinions and the like just the transgenerational everything, like gifts and blessings, but also traumas and
Mhm.
imprints and epigenetics of all the things. I mean, it's when we can be in that and come closer to our own voice and standing in that more and more. I mean, it is a journey. It's definitely, it doesn't matter how old we are, right? I
Mhm.
mean, my mother and my grandmother, if I watch them, my grandmother will still speak to my mother who's like 60 plus, whatever, right? Like the child that she is to her. And just,
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, it's just, I mean, it is fascinating too, the dynamics that we play out within our family.
Yeah, and it was actually, how my entire thesis changed because of my pregnancy. With that first pregnancy, I was super sick the first 4 months. I lost 17 pounds, so like 6 kilos or something.
Mm,
And I was throwing up 3 to 5 times a day. I was just very, very sick.
mm.
And part of what I was going to do was this tracing of my ancestors in Colombia. I was going to do all this traveling to different parts, and like I could not leave the house. And so it ended up being, so I talked to my advisor and I switched the focus of my thesis of then this deep dive into exactly what you're talking about, of like being in the midst of my childhood home, because it's all, they still live in the place where I grew up. And so in my bedroom and so like all these things,
Wow.
and it ended up this deep dive, this deep investigation of my ancestry through the lens of my immediate family, and what that nest brings up for me, and like all this personal work that I ended up doing.
Wow. I
Yeah,
mean,
so
your baby brought you there for
yeah.
sure. I mean, the cool thing about having the blessing of having a child is that each step of the way, even like, you know, days in the womb, weeks, months, years outside, and so on, every step of the way, we get to meet ourselves,
Mm.
in relation to our parents and all the imprints, like when you have a tantrum on, or not tantrum, but when your 4-year-old has a tantrum and you get reactive, like what you get reactive to, right, is a healing process. You can have
Mhm.
the opportunity here not to perpetuate what your parents did, which we often do, though, isn't it? That we
Yeah,
unconsciously just continue.
it's just
But
a
so, like,
reflex.
when you conceived, you got to be there in your childhood home. Like, I am
I know.
so fascinated right now by this story already. Like, wow, that is potent shit.
I know. I know. And I mean, I started working with an indigenous medicine man from the Muisca tribe, which is the Muiscas inhabit the lands where I was born and raised and where my family has been living in for generations. And that's been one of my processes of getting closer to my indigeneity and decolonizing the way I was raised, and getting close to an unspoken history of my family that, there's the narrative that, oh, our ancestors came from Spain and some came from France, and yes, of course, we have European ancestry, but there's never mention of the indigenous ancestry. It's completely forgotten, erased. And
Mm.
so I've been doing this work of unearthing that and getting close to that. And so my spiritual teacher, who I still work with on a weekly basis, yeah, he told me something very similar than what you just said. When I came to him when I was pregnant with my first, and told him, like, I was kind of freaking out. I was like, what is going to happen to my life, to my work? I'm very anxious about
Mm.
how this is going to transform my identity. And he just like looked at me, and like I was from another planet, because he's just very matter of fact. And he was like, what's your problem? But he was like, if kids come to this world
Mm.
to clarify our path,
Mm.
it's like what your babies are here to do is to further clarify who you are and not get you further from it. And
Mm.
yeah, he was very genuine. He's very genuinely matter of fact. Like he is really bewildered by some of the stuff that the Western, mindset makes us
Mm.
do. And so
I'm
um
bewildered every day.
yeah. And I remember at that time it's not that I didn't believe him, but I didn't understand what he was talking
Mm.
about. And 4 years later, I'm like, wow, like 150% true. That has been like every it's just, I'm more who I wanted to be because I had kids,
Mm,
because I went through this process of pregnancy and birth and,
mm,
mothering. And it's like every step of the way has been tremendously, like you said, healing and empowering and clarifying, and in ways that I just never thought,
mm.
and when I hear myself say these things, it's like, wow, like 10 years ago, I would be like, who is this person? Like,
Mhm.
like I definitely transformed. I definitely transformed, like that maiden to mother transformation for me, which is one of the things that really drew me to you and to the way that you talk about birth. And then I devoured Rachel Reed's book after I heard your podcast on your own journey.
Mm.
And wow. And now I'm working with them to create this prenatal and postnatal workshops for women through movement and dance, which is my practice. Because I find that that's so much what is missing in holding space for women to really embrace the transformation.
Mm.
A really good friend of mine, when I was pregnant with my first, told me the best advice I could. She was pregnant with her second, and she said the best advice I can give you is to embrace the transformation. Don't
Yes.
hold on to who you were,
Mm-mm.
because that's what's going to bring you pain and suffering.
Yes.
But really embrace the transformation. And again, I didn't know really what she meant, but then after the fact, I'm like, whoa.
Mm.
And I could see like how all this, like the postpartum depression rates and
Mm.
the suffering that we go through. I mean, it's all also structural, and it has to do with the lack of support
Yes.
and the systems in place. But it's like we don't have this space, this acknowledgement, or this
No.
even this no guidance, no nothing for like this massive earth shattering
Yes.
change and shift that happens in our lives when
Mm.
we literally live the death of the maiden, and
Yes.
then we are rebirth as the mother. And that's so, like, I
Mm.
get chills just
Mm.
thinking about it. It's like so profound
Yeah.
and huge, and we just don't even talk about it, and then we just,
Yes.
I don't know, it's just,
Mm.
so it's I don't know, I sorry I went off on a tangent there, but it was it's
A
just
very
such a
important
powerful, yeah.
tangent, I mean, we can't talk enough about this and oh, it is such a disservice not to do it,
Mhm.
truly. Because what you just shared is key information for all women who, especially when you're, the first time around, truly, that suffering in the postpartum, a huge part of it. I mean, there's so many different things. And I mean, I go into depth
Mhm.
about this in the mentorship that I have, the Sacred Birthright mentorship. Like, one big part is that identity crisis that happens because we are not prepared for it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that total like surrendering of who you were, like you have
Mhm.
to surrender her and see what parts still remain that will continue on also into the, motherhood, but also to be totally like, I'm gonna also like and you know what? In this also world that it can be, it's very, a very secular world too. I mean, it's everything, but spirit definitely doesn't have the space that it used to have within most humans today, right?
Mhm.
And also that thing about surrendering to something greater than yourself.
Mhm.
Like there is a release in that. There is actually like, there's joy. There is, it's a blessing to be able to do that. Like if you tune into that visceral, like in your body, you can feel the sigh letting go as I surrender. Like it's not just up to me, and like it's not just up to me to be this persona, but like I can in motherhood, I can surrender essentially so much of my ego into becoming the servant of this new life, truly.
Mhm. Mhm.
Which is similar in one sense to like surrendering your life as well, in a sense, to the guidance of something divine, something bigger than yourself. Like it's not just up to you, like
Mhm.
yeah, to the mystery, to
Mhm.
something so much more wise.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
journey
This,
is wise.
yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I was completely floored by that. I mean, I was not expecting that from
Mm.
motherhood and birth and having a kid and being pregnant. I was just like, I'm happy without kids. If it comes, great. If not, great. And,
Mm,
and then long and behold, it's been just this huge, huge transformation. And I think that piece of advice is what saved me because I really, the first few months postpartum after my first, I didn't recognize myself.
mm,
And even my partner, and granted, she was also born right at the beginning of COVID. So it was also a very intense time for other reasons.
mm,
But yeah, sometimes my partner, not out of a criticism, but just like out of a curiosity, it's like, wow, I do not recognize you. And I'm like, I
mm,
know, I don't
mm,
recognize myself. This is like scary shit. Like, I'm just
mm,
like, yeah, like I just never thought like I'm
mm,
the biggest mom nerd in the world. Like, I just love to mother. And I just never thought
mm,
I see some of my friends that are working artists as well and have kids, and they very much like very early on need to go back to their practice and arrange their way of mothering to support that. And I just assumed that that's what's going to be me, because I had been so immersed in my. And no, that was not me. I was like, I want my baby with me all the time. It's like, and I
yeah.
want to raise this baby. I went through this whole crisis of
Mm,
wanting to quit my job and all these things anyway. But
mm,
it was very scary. Like
mm,
that's really it. It was very scary to feel like I didn't recognize who I was and I had
mm,
like nothing to fall back on, right? So
mm,
I didn't have a community or a network or understanding, or just like I've never heard anyone talk about any of this. I mean,
mm,
it's starting just from the basic function of the body. I started thinking, I
mm,
was like, wow, I've never even looked at my vulva before. And so like I
mm.
grabbed a mirror and I was like, whoa, like you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
just these things that I get so upset that
Mm,
we're so kept in the dark
yeah.
as women or as people that carry this feminine
Mm,
bodies that we can't think of the word in English. The word in Spanish is desconocer. Like we
mm,
totally do not know
mm,
um what we're capable of, what we are
mm,
like, both like physiologically, but
mm.
then also just like spiritually, and like this just huge capacity
Yeah.
that we have for growth and for love and for
Yeah.
surrender and for I don't know. I mean, it's just so powerful. And I was talking to a former student of mine because she was like, "Man, every time I talk to you, it makes me think that I want to have kids just to experience what that's like." And I'm like, I don't think I would have ever said this, um, of course, before experiencing it, and would have been pissed if someone told me this, but I
Yeah.
think you should,
Yeah.
but yeah, anyway, it's just such a powerful experience.
Well,
Um,
it's I lost my train of thought there for a second. I was just thinking that, we want to say like it's the best kept secret. But it's not. That's totally the wrong thing to say. Um, because it's not valued. That's why, like, none of it is valued monetarily. Motherhood, birthing, pregnancy. And most women don't have this experience that you had as well. Like, most will be fully medicated and disconnected to it as well through this. They don't have this awakening that it is possible for it to bring as
mhm.
well. So let's dive into your birth stories now, shall we? Because I
Mhm.
can tell you and I can talk for a long time about these
Yes.
things, but we're here for your birth stories.
Uh,
So tell us about the first,
yeah.
and how it also unfolded in a way that maybe wasn't what you were hoping, but maybe what also broke you open in one way or
Yeah.
another.
I like to think about my daughter's birth as the birth that I and my family needed
Mm,
in that moment in time. So we were planning for a home birth. And, March 2020, everything here shut down because of the pandemic. And I was 8 months pregnant. And so at that moment, I was like, well, I'm glad that we're planning for a home birth because who wants to go into a hospital right now? So there was like, and then I started hearing all the stories coming out of New York that spouses weren't allowed to go into the hospital to birth with women, and like that this has started to become a trend around the US. And I was like, okay, well, our baby's going to be born at home, so we're not going to have that issue and all these things. And then I was 40 plus 7 or something like that, or 6. So I was getting close to 41 weeks. And in Texas, there's a law that prevents midwives from delivering babies past 42 weeks.
Mm.
And so my midwife told me, we're getting close to that time. I would suggest, she's like, if you want to buy yourself a little bit more time, what we could do is the biomedical fetal profile or something. I don't know.
Yeah, you do an
The,
ultrasound, you check the
yeah, the
flow,
ultrasound.
and you do a
Exactly.
CTG, non-stress test, check the baby's heart
Exactly.
rate. Yeah.
And so she said, we can do that. And then if everything comes out good, it can buy us a few more days. And I was like, okay, sure, let's do it. And so I went in and did it, and everything was fine except my amniotic fluid got a low reading. I know. And so I've been.
For everyone listening, I just dropped my head. So, I mean, I've said this so many other times, but
I
again,
know.
for someone who's new, like amniotic fluid on its own, there's no evidence that that matters at bloody all. So that's why I
I know.
reacted.
And so I've heard you so many times say exactly this in other podcasts. And so yeah, so it was until this preparation for this birth that I realized, oh, like all these things, unnecessary things happened in my first birth that if I would have been better informed, I wouldn't have gone through them. But
Yeah.
that's just where I was and what I knew and what I had available. And so
Yeah.
they made this huge deal at the imaging center about it. They kept us in there for like 2 hours. They wouldn't let us go. They wouldn't tell us what was happening. They said, we would need to talk to your provider right now. Like it was just all very scary.
Yeah.
And again, we are here like first time parents in the middle
Yeah.
of the pandemic, trying to figure out what was happening. An exam that should have lasted 30 minutes lasted 2 hours on the table, and they kept us 2 hours
Mhm.
afterwards in the waiting room. And then finally we get a call because they were trying to call directly our midwife. And finally I get a call from her. And she said, it's like, I don't know what they're making this big deal about it. Just, you know, go eat a snack and then come meet me at the birth center. We'll talk about, what's happening and what your options are and stuff. And we're like,
Right.
okay. And so we went, had something to eat because I was also starving. I didn't
Oh,
I didn't take any snacks and stuff. So I was also like really anxious about that.
of course.
Anyway, so we got to the birthing center, and she explained to us what happens. Like, everything's fine, baby's fine, you're fine, but you have this low amniotic fluid reading. And so what that means is that there could potentially be fetal distress if you don't go into labor soon. So she told us, my suggestion is you could either get a second reading,
Mm.
to see if you can get a second opinion. I would recommend you to do that at a hospital though, and not at a regular imaging center.
Mm.
Um, or we can induce here, because what she said is like, if you go to the hospital and get the same reading, you're basically not coming back out.
Well,
Meaning,
that's not okay though, because I don't like
I,
this midwife because she's not informing you well here. And I just want everyone to know that because it's like you
no,
can always decline absolutely everything and you can go home at
I didn't
42
know that.
weeks and
I
all of
know,
these things, right? And also
I
when
know.
it comes to amniotic fluid, right, it's your baby's pee. So like it depends on how much you drink. You were bloody starving for hours there as
Mm.
well. Like it's about peeing. So and that on its own doesn't matter. If they check and you have low amniotic fluid, like really, really low, and it's poor flow from the placenta, then we're talking business. Like, okay, then we're talking maybe something can be up with your baby. But on its own, it doesn't, it definitely does not talk about distress for that baby at all. And yeah, I'm annoyed with your midwife right now.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've learned again, like I've learned this whole process of preparing for the second birth, that
Mm.
there was a lot of things that, and then maybe she said, but I was not able to hear. So for example, when she would suggest something, because I asked for my hospital records and my midwife records for my first birth as I was preparing for this, because I wanted to understand what had happened, when it had happened, what they had told me, and I asked for the hospital records too of her birth. But I realized that yeah, I mean, as a first, and this is the one thing that I'm like so grateful for your podcast, because like I just never heard that, oh, I actually have a choice to get up and leave the hospital. Like,
Yes.
it's like, oh, I actually have a choice to like decline induction, even though that's what they're recommending. Like, I
Mm.
had no idea, so I was very
Mm.
much saying like, well, of course. I mean, if it's necessary, like, I mean, which mom is going to say
Yeah.
no when they put it in that way, like when they say it's going to be
Yes.
dangerous for you or your baby. I mean, of course you want, a
Yes.
positive outcome, and you want your baby to be healthy. And so, because, I was all like against the hospital, it's like, I don't want to go into the hospital, and much less during COVID. Um, I said, okay, let's just do the induction here. And
Mm.
so again, at that moment, I didn't relate to that as an intervention, because it was not
Mm.
chemically induced, like it was not Pitocin
Mm.
basically. And so I was like, oh, it's just like with natural herbs, and they gave me a tonic, and they did the membrane sweep that I had actually totally blocked out of
Mhm.
my memory. It was not until I read
Mhm.
the the report of what they did that day,
Mm.
and then I talked to my husband, and I was like, did I do this? And he was like, yeah, you complained about being very uncomfortable. And I was like, I have no memory
Mm.
about this. And he was like, maybe it was that traumatic that you
Yeah.
just pushed it out of your memory. And I really don't remember. I mean, yeah, I do remember the tonic that they gave me, but I don't remember the sweep.
Mm.
But anyway, so she did this around, I don't know, like 2 p.m. or 2 or 3, yeah, 2 p.m., 2 or 3 p.m. And she said, I want you to stay here for a couple of hours just to observe how you're progressing and stuff. And sure enough, like around 4 p.m., I started with contractions.
Mm.
And she was very meticulous in checking the baby's heart rate every 30 minutes. She wanted to make sure that the baby was okay. And we stayed there until like 8 p.m. And then she's like, okay, go home, rest, call me if things pick up. And then she called us around like 10 p.m. and she's like, how are you doing? And I'm like, it's fine. The contractions are still coming. She's like, can I just come and spend the night? I just want to keep an ear on baby. And I'm like, sure. So she was very anxious about the well-being of the baby. I think
Mm.
probably because she was also misinformed about the low
Yeah.
amniotic fluid being, an
Yeah.
issue.
Problem. Yeah.
And so
And
I'm
that
like, well,
energy.
and that's exactly what I've come to realize, that
Mm-hmm.
it was probably my baby saying like, oh no, like I'm not gonna come into this energy, and my body would not open up with that energy either.
Because you feel her like a woman in labor, a pregnant woman is very intuitive and very open and very sensitive, but a laboring woman is like, she feels all the realms. She feels
Yeah.
everything. And so if there's an anxious midwife or birth worker in that room, which obviously she wanted to come and you didn't even call her because she
Mhm.
was worried about baby. Oh my God, of course that
Mhm.
would affect your progress and like how you would enter into that safely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so she was there from 10 p.m. throughout the night. Every 30 minutes, she would come in and listen to baby. Um, So I didn't sleep very well at all that night. And contractions were still the same. And again, first time mom, I had no idea what contractions were going to be like, how intense they were going to get. Every time they would get more intense, they just felt, okay, this must be it because this is pretty intense. And they were like, oh no, did you have a way to go? So I was still very much in early labor. And then I called my doula because I had a really wonderful doula, and she came to support me. And um, then, my midwife said, your baby's still really high up. We need to encourage the baby to come down into the birth canal. And so she asked for my permission to do all this positioning and manipulations with the rebozo and like all these things to kind of try to get the baby to squiggle down. And I'm like, sure. I mean, I understand like by law people need to ask consent from a laboring woman, all this stuff, but it's just like insane. It's like when you get asked these questions and you have very little information, especially as a first time mom. I'm like, well, yes. I mean, what am I gonna say? It's like because everything was always presented to me as like it's either this or the hospital. I'm like, well, this obviously,
Yeah.
because I'm not gonna go into the hospital. And I was not in tune with I didn't know about the acronym brain or
Hmm.
you're the one that uses brain, right? Like I
Yeah.
really love especially the added I because I
Mm.
heard it as brand without the I, but it's like, oh, intuition is so
Mm.
important.
Hmm.
And so so yeah, for I guess for people listening that don't know about the brain, do you want to explain it quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So the acronym stands for benefit, risk, intuition, alternative, and doing nothing. So with any kind of offering, pregnancy, labor, birth, postpartum, motherhood, life, just have brain as in the back of your head to go, oh, you want to do the Rebosa. What's the benefit? What's the risk of that? What's the alternative if I don't want to do that? What is my intuition telling me about
Mhm.
this offer? And what happens if we do nothing? And
Mhm.
there's always
Yeah.
all those options are valid. You can say that you don't want to do anything. You don't have to choose one or the other either.
Yeah. And I wish I knew all that, which I didn't, so I just said yes to everything. And again, I think that part of it was kind of I was pulling far away enough from what I knew of hospital birth and stuff. So to me, and again, this I didn't understand until I started listening to your podcast. Um, I didn't relate to that as interventions because it's like, well, I'm with a midwife, and so I possibly can't have any interventions with a midwife because this is supposed to be natural. But like
Yeah.
I was just very misinformed about what I could do and how I could take responsibility of my own birth. And
Mm.
so I just went along with everything they suggested. And after a couple of hours of pretty like strenuous, like handling and like baby was still up. I was only dilated to 3.
And what time is
And
this? Like, how long had she been
um,
there? How long had you been in kind of labor-ish land?
so this was maybe shortly afternoon, early afternoon.
Right.
So I had been
And you took that tonic and everything and got some contractions in the evening
Yeah, in the late
before.
afternoon, so around 4 p.m. of the
Yeah.
day before. So I was getting close to the 24 hours
And by
of
this
being in
time,
labor.
like, what were the contractions doing? Did they intensify as time went on and like
I
got
felt that
closer
they
and
were
stronger?
intensifying, but I just didn't know what to expect. So I just didn't know.
Mm.
I mean, they felt intense, but they were like, "Oh no, 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 you're really far off." And so I was like, "Okay, I want another cervical check because I want to know if I'm progressing." I was very much like trying to measure progress, in
Yeah.
quotation marks, trying to figure out like where I was. And so it was in the early afternoon. And this is all like really blurry for me in terms of my memory of what timing was. It was
Mm.
again like looking through the log that they had that I requested when I was preparing for my second birth that I kind of learned is like, oh, this is the timing when things happened, and this is what was told to me. And so it wasn't until I was reading that I realized that the midwife suggested for me to go to the hospital at that point to do a hospital transfer um, because there could be fetal stress. What I had heard or imagined at that moment is that the baby was already stressed.
Yeah.
And so it was not until 4 years later that I'm reading this. I'm like,
Mm.
what? My baby was not stressed when we went to the hospital? Like, and that was news to me. And again,
Yeah.
I think that has more to do with my misinformation about how providers may offer something or suggest
Mm.
something than necessarily how she said it or worded it or whatever. But I
Well, you
think
know
it
what?
was
She
also,
shouldn't even have been there, though.
yeah. I mean, and I also
She
think
was
it's
there, like, disturbing you the whole night. You were in early stages, if even that, like, as it was all kicking on, you know. Also, it wasn't spontaneous. It was also like jump starting your body when she maybe wanted to go a few more days. Maybe your baby wanted to stay in there a few more days, right? And then, but your body ticked along as, it was suggested to do, which was very nice of your body to do. Listen to that little nudge. But then she was there like you couldn't sleep. If someone's coming in and listening to your baby's heart rate all night, you wouldn't have slept.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was exhausted also
Oh,
at this point. And
yeah.
um, when, you know, and I felt her anxious energy all the time. And I was kind of trying to ignore it, trying to just focus and listen to baby and talk to baby. And I also really didn't like how she talked to my partner first about the suggestion for transfer, which I appreciate the intention of kind of like not talking when I'm there about it. But the way that she did it was like, "Hey, Chris, can I come talk to you?" in front of me. And so she takes him out of the room. And then I'm left there with my doula, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what they're talking about. You know what I'm saying? Like it was just not done tactfully in a way that, so of course I was feeling already all that anxiety. And then she comes and drags him out. And so I'm like, okay, so something's up, obviously. And then they come back and she says, this is what's happening. You're taking too long. You're not progressing. You've been in labor for quite a while. And with your low amniotic fluid reading, I think the safest place for your baby to be born is at a hospital. Because I think you need your fetal monitor, the fetal monitoring thing constant. And she's like, and I guess she must have said, do you accept the transfer? And again, it's like, I mean, it's like how like in my, again, because I was not informed that I could actually decline that. I was like, well, yeah, I mean, like what kind of question is that? I mean, if you think, you know, like the baby's getting stressed and like, well, yes, of course I want my baby to be in the safest place that they can be. And so, you know, she made it very clear that this was not an emergency, that we didn't need to rush to the hospital. So she said, you know, take a shower, eat a meal, and I'll drive you to the hospital. Just, you know, you don't have to rush. And so apparently I took that too seriously, because we ended up taking like 3 hours. And at some point she was like, okay, come on. So I went in to take a shower with my partner. And I feel like that was the moment where my body fully gave into the process. And I dilated a lot while I was in the shower. And I feel like what helped me was me letting go and
Yes.
just embracing the ride.
Mm.
Because to me, and again, because my mom's experience, hospital meant C-section.
Mm.
At that point, I was letting go and accepting that I was going to have a C-section.
Mm.
And so I was just like, this is what's happening. I can't resist what's happening. And I just need to give into this. My poor partner was in tears. He was like, you know, because he was very nervous about having to go to the hospital without our doula, because we couldn't go with her.
COVID.
And we couldn't go with our midwives and stuff. And he, you know, the way that he described it after the fact is like, I felt like I had all these amazing women taking care of shit, and then it was going to be up to me. It's like, what am I going to do? It's like, I'm just this dude that has no idea what's happening. And so he was a little nervous, and I was the one that calmed him down. Like I just kind of like, I was kind of like dancing through the contractions, and I was like, we got this, baby. We're going to do this together. You and I, you know, are all that this baby needs. And like, I was just full of this, like, I just need to let go. This is what my baby needs. And I felt like that's when it really,
Yes.
you know, really kicked up.
Mm-hmm. You surrendered. You surrendered
Yeah,
yourself to the great mystery, and you let
yes.
go
And I felt
to
that that was
whatever
the key to,
destiny. Mm-hmm.
and had I known then what I know now, I would have just told her, you know, I'm staying, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we're this baby's going to be born here. But you know, like I wasn't there yet. And
Yeah.
so we
But
went to the hospital.
that energy is what opens you. Like,
Yeah,
and
absolutely. And I
I just
felt
think
it.
that's so beautiful, like
Yeah.
beautiful piece of wisdom shared there, like that surrender to whatever may come, like, and we've got this. And it's like the way you held grace in that moment, truly,
Mhm.
I feel is key here.
Yeah. And then, you know, we went to the hospital, and then she came pretty quickly after getting to the hospital. So we checked in around 7, and we were put in triage and had the fetal monitor stuck to me. And the wonderful blessing in this whole situation is what they were very short staffed.
Thank
Because
God.
at this, I know. So same time that I came in, like 3 or 4 other women that were not in their C-section schedule came in to birth their babies. And so they were really short staffed. So they just left us by ourselves. So I just labored with my partner on our own with that stupid machine attached to my belly.
Mm.
So no one was monitoring, it was just us. And there was this moment where I was noticing that her heart rate was going up during contractions because I was starting to get really anxious. And, I have a long meditation practice, and my partner does too. And a lot of our relationship has been grounded on meditation and doing mindful practices together. And he just kind of held my hands and looked at me in between contractions. And he said, "You're the only one that can help this baby right now. You got this. You don't need to look at that anymore. Just breathe with me, and your baby's going to be fine." And he breathed with me through 2 contractions. I looked one more time. Her heart rate was back to normal, and I never looked at that thing again. And I'm like, I got this. I got
Mm.
my baby. Um, yeah, and it was really a powerful moment for him to be like, and that's the thing that when I say that I feel like that birth was exactly what our family needed. Like we came out of that birth feeling so close, and like my love for my partner and our strength in our relationship intensified so much because we felt like we had to cross this together, and there was no one else there to hold us. And he
Mhm.
was the one like providing all the comfort measures and the pressure points that our doula had taught us. And he snuck in water for me, and so he was like giving me water because we're not allowed to drink water in the hospitals while you're in labor.
Excuse me, what?
Yeah, no, they give you ice to suck on. Yeah.
Okay.
Because then you have to pee, and so then it's inconvenient for them to unhook you from the fetal monitor for you to
Not
go
just
pee.
that, it's about assuming you're gonna need surgery. You're not allowed to eat and drink because you then will have a full tummy
Yeah, I know that that's
and
the
bladder
history,
and
but
stuff like that.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Anyway, I ended up having to pee because I was drinking water, and so I told my partners, like, go tell the nurse up front to unhook me because I need to go pee. And he went there, and she was like resistant and stuff. And then he came back and she's like, I don't know. And he was like, tell her that I'm going to pee right here. I'm going to pee in the bed. So either she unhooks me or I'm going to pee in the bed. And she's like, ah, fine. She comes and unhooks me. And as soon as I stand up, I lost all of my mucus plug. And I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure that that's my mucus plug. And she was like, oh, I don't think so. You're still pretty early on. You were at 3 when you came in. I don't think that. And I'm like, whatever. I went to the bathroom and I came back, and I told her, this is pretty intense. And I think I want you to check me because I think that I'm like, oh, no, you're not. And she's like, fine, fine. I'll check you. And she checked me and her eyes opened. And she was like, oh my gosh, you're over 7 centimeters. You can't have a baby here. We need to get you. And she starts scrambling to try to move me to a delivery room. I get into the delivery room. The doctor comes and she's like, I want to give you Pitocin. And I'm like, why? I don't want Pitocin unless it's absolutely medically necessary. I do not want Pitocin. And she's like, I think it's medically necessary. And I was like, okay, I guess if you need to give me Pitocin, then give me Pitocin. She's like, okay, I'm going to go get the consent forms because I don't know how it works over there. But here in the US, they had to read you the consent forms before
Yes,
giving you Pitocin, while you're in labor.
everywhere. Yes, you have to.
And so she left, and again, short-staffed. She left for a long time, and I just kept laboring. I just kept laboring, and then she came back with the forms, and then she starts reading them to me as a contraction starts. And so I'm screaming, and she's trying to read these forms over my screaming, over my vocalizing. And finally, my partner just turns around. She's like, can you just do it at a different moment? Like, obviously, she cannot like consent to this while she's in the middle of a contraction. It's like, and she was like, gives the forms to the nurse, which the nurse can't read. It has to be the doctor. So she gives the forms to the nurse. She's like, I'll be right back. Leaves. And again, for a long time, because they're short staffed. She left for a long time. And then it's just me, my partner, and the nurse there. And then I started to feel like a trickling of water, and I started to feel the urge to push. And I told her, maybe my water just broke. I'm feeling the urge to push. I think I'm going to have the baby right now. And she was like, oh no, you were just at 7. It still takes a long time, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm going to push because I'm feeling this urge and like I can't. So I'm going to push. It's like, no, 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 you can't have the baby without the doctor. You can't have the baby without it. And like, then go get the doctor because I am pushing right now. So she goes and gets the doctor. And the doctor comes in and still she's like, oh, you can't be fully dilated by now. You were only 7 a few minutes ago or whatever. She still insists in reading me the Pitocin forms.
But why this incompetent doctor? Like, I cannot wrap my head around the insanity of wanting to give you contraction stimulating hormone when you're obviously doing fine on your
I know.
own. Like, it just blows my mind. I go like, my brain just goes like, who is this incompetent person? Like, do they not know? Like, what?
And granted, I do think that she was a young doctor because a supervisor came coming in to check on how she was
Okay.
doing. So I think that she was probably dealing with one of her first births. So she was very
Right.
new. Um, and it got
She
to the
was
point,
incompetent.
yeah, I mean, still, but
Yeah.
you know, I
Yeah.
told her at that point, I said, you know what? Um, just check me again, like because I'm feeling the urge to push. And she was like, okay, fine. I'll check you and then I'll read you the forms to do the Pitocin. And I'm like, fine. And then she checks me again and again, her eyes widen. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're fully dilated. You're ready to have this baby. And I'm like, I've been telling you that I'm ready to push this baby. It's like, I know I'm a first time mom, but man, like this feels pretty urgent. So anyway, and at that point, like her attitude, the doctor's attitude really shifted. And she was like, okay, she just looked at me because when she did the cervical check, she noticed that she had meconium. It was stained with meconium. So she was like, we have to get the baby out quickly, but you can do this. I'm here, you can do this, you can get this baby out. And she was like cheering me on, to push. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized that I was going to be able to have a vaginal birth.
Mm.
Because remember, up to all this time, I was just
Mm.
assuming that this was all leading to a C-section because I hadn't even considered that having a vaginal birth at a hospital was a possibility.
Mm.
And so it was in that moment where she said, you're ready to push. Then I'm like, wait, what? Like, I'm actually going to be able to birth this baby vaginally? Like, it was, I don't know, like, it was a really exciting moment for me because it was like, oh my God, like, I can actually have this baby. And she ran out of time to give it Pitocin. And so, um, I pushed for about 50 minutes and she was born. Um, I had a second-degree tear because, of course, there was no any like I was, on my back strapped to the fetal monitor and like they were telling me to push and push and push and push and push. There was no like anyway.
Mm.
But I still felt pretty lucky considering everything to have been able to give the birth without the Pitocin and without the epidural and without, because yeah, when the epidural was offered to me, I was like, no. And there's like, it's now or never. I was like, it's never. No, thank you. Like, back off. I don't want the epidural. Um, and then with the Pitocin, she just ran out of time. She just ran out of time because they didn't have the staff to be on me to read me the
Yeah,
forms.
and that
And
was just
so,
a crazy suggestion. I've never heard anyone wanting to push Pitocin so hard for absolutely no reason. Like,
yeah,
literally, you're having a baby. Like, let me just write read you this form. It's like, "Act that
yeah,
form."
I know. It's just like I do remember just being like, what is going on?
Oh yeah.
Like, yeah,
Well, it makes
it's
sense if she
really,
was a young newbie, and
yeah.
probably everyone has Syntos or Pitocin, that she's seen. So she just assumed that
Yeah,
that has to
absolutely.
happen because otherwise the
Has to
baby
happen.
can't be
Can't
birthed.
come
Like,
out.
how
And
how
that's the
can how
thing is,
could it come out without the Pitocin? I mean, the
and
Pitocin doesn't.
exactly. And I think that's just women's belief. Like that was my mom's belief. Like
Yeah, yeah.
after I had her, my mom was like, I mean, of course, poor mom. My mom was like, you glued to her phone because they were not able to travel here for the birth
Mm.
because of COVID. And she
Mm.
was like, oh, did you have a C-section? What happened? Like, and then she still asks me, are you sure you didn't get you didn't have a forceps delivery? Are you sure that you didn't get the cut? I forget the name of
Episiotomy.
episiotomy. Yeah, because she had episiotomies, even though then they were C-sectioned. And so she was
Oh.
like, are you sure that you didn't get an
Oh my God, she
episiotomy? Are
got
you?
everything. Oh my God, your poor
Yeah,
mother.
I know.
Oh,
I know. So she still to this day has a hard time believing that birth, even though she was
yeah.
here to witness my second birth, which I think
Mm.
was really great. But it was yeah, it was a trip. And then the most violent thing that I experienced there was getting the placenta out, like the birth of the placenta.
Yeah.
Because immediately after, so they put my baby, I like tore my gown, my medical gown, because they wanted the skin to skin directly. I put her there and she immediately rooted for the breast. And so she was
Mm.
breastfeeding and I was just here. And then all of a sudden, the doctor and this nurse start pushing in my belly and like without asking me or telling me what they were doing or why they were doing it. And it was the most excruciating pain that I had felt throughout the whole process. It was worse than the contractions.
Yeah.
And I mean, why people, do that, to avoid hemorrhage or whatever it
It
is. But
actually, the risk of hemorrhage is greater to do that.
I mean, it was
You
horrible.
shouldn't
Like the
touch a woman's belly after birth. Like that is a practice that I am gobsmacked that they do in the US
yeah,
because I hear it
it's
over and over
horrendous.
again. Because the
It's
risk is that
horrendous.
they actually push out your uterus. Like the risk is that they actually like you get a uterine prolapse or like, I mean, no, there's no actual like there's no evidence, there's no reason. Like it's a practice that is torture, truly. Like it's just not, it should not be happening.
Yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. It felt like torture. Like that was, and it was just like feeling like, because I couldn't speak when they were doing that. It's like, and I'm having this moment of bonding with my newborn, and then this is happening to me, and I'm just like looking around, like, does anyone else see this happen? Like, is this normal? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's just like talk to the birthing
Mm.
woman. At least give her a heads up that you're about to do that. I don't know. It was just a very,
That's also
and
ask
again,
for consent. That's
yeah,
obstetric
exactly.
violence. Like, are
It's
you
really, it
okay
was
with
really
me
awful.
doing really vigorous, hard fundal massage without evidence around it? That should be the informed consent,
Consent, yeah.
given, with the information that they need to
Yeah.
say. Yeah. And I'm guessing they gave you Pitocin for that placenta to come out and that they pulled it
They
out.
did. And I didn't
Hmm.
know, I didn't find that out until I read my hospital
Hmm.
things 4 years later. I'm like, are you
Hmm.
serious? They gave me Pitocin without even asking? I was so mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was so upset because for that one, they didn't ask for consent.
Mm-mm.
They just gave me the Pitocin and I didn't find out until I read the hospital, report
Yeah.
that I
That's,
requested.
that's again a violation to give you
Yeah.
synthetic hormone injection into your body without your consent.
Yeah. It's terrible.
It
It's,
is.
and I think that the scariest thing about the whole thing is that I know by hearing your podcast and hearing other women's stories that I got lucky, that I mean, or not lucky, but that I was blessed to have.
You were protected that
Yeah.
night. You were
Yes.
like that. They were short staffed.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Mm.
So I had a lot of trauma and grief to deal with after that. Um,
Mm.
Coming back home from the hospital. And then the other thing that I know is will infuriate you because it infuriated me, but um, they had to keep me twice as long in the hospital because they labeled us as neglectful parents because they don't consider midwifery care proper prenatal care. And this is the hospital in El Paso that has nurse midwives on staff and that is considered to be the most natural birth friendly hospital.
Holy shit.
So then we were kept in the hospital for like 76 hours for no reason other than we didn't have. And then I found out that I could have just left. One of those other
Yeah.
things that I just, they
And
tell
of
you have to
course,
stay, then,
you could have left, but the reality is also mandatory reporting happens to, child and family health services or
yeah,
whatever you call it,
services,
right?
yeah,
And that just simply be, stating that you're a sovereign human being, that this, you can take care of your child and that you don't, need to stay is your right. But
yeah,
it's that navigation of also looking at who's on staff and,
yeah.
you
And what
know,
are going to be the repercussions of doing that? And
yes. And
yeah,
so I want to say, of course, and I am like, definitely very vocal about like you can decline absolutely everything, but there's also consequences to that in a society that definitely deems woman as she becomes a mother as unfit by nature,
Mhm.
unless proven otherwise. And that means following exactly what they think is right.
Right.
That's truly the scary world that you enter into as a mother and
Mhm.
as a parent. If you just do not do kind of the sheep thing of doing everything the way that they tell you to do, if you have another opinion, you do run the risk of that.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be aware of that as well as we make our sovereign decisions in the system. And that's why, like, you have to be also aware of that when you enter that system.
Absolutely.
Wowzers, what a
Mhm.
journey. I mean, congratulations though on having that birth outcome
Mhm.
in that system. Yeah, you were definitely blessed to
Yeah.
being left alone that much.
Mhm.
And then believing that you were so early. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
blessing that
Yeah.
that they thought that. So, okay, well, let's dive on into your second. So,
Mhm.
obviously, what, 3 years or something in between before you got pregnant again? And
Yeah, 3 years and a couple months or a few months, and then I got pregnant
yeah,
again.
and
Yeah,
doing some
so
healing work potentially through that time.
yeah, so like my first, I did a lot of grieving right when we came back from the hospital. My partner was very sweet. We came in and then, he like organized me downstairs, gave me some coconut water, some of the goody things that we had bought for the birth at home. And he told me, relax here, call your parents, I'll be right back. And he went upstairs and reorganized the whole bedroom because everything had been left in disarray from the transfer.
Yeah.
And he didn't want me to walk back in and have that memory of
Mm.
not having been able to have the birth.
Mm.
And he put some flowers on the bed and he rearranged, made the like our
Oh.
little nest. It was just so when I came up, of course I cried and I grieved, but
Mm.
it was like also a very beautiful gesture that helped me feel, okay, this is our new beginning. And he lit our baby's birth candle, because we had the intention of have this candle lit throughout the second part of like the advanced labor and the birth, for the baby to be born with light. And of course we had to blow the candle out before we left for the hospital. And so he went and lit the candle and everything and kind of welcomed us into that space, the baby and me, with the candle lit and stuff. So it was really beautiful. Like I'm so grateful for that gesture that he even thought that was going to have such a big impact of me, of returning to the place where I had to let go of my dream birth.
Mm. What a beautifully,
And
beautifully conscious, aware, empathic man.
yeah, he's phenomenal. He's, yeah,
Hmm. Congratulations on
thank
attracting
you.
that beautiful person into your life.
Yeah. Yeah, so that I did a lot of grieving then, and but then it was like years of understanding. And I think I did a lot of healing in the preparation for my second birth as
Yes.
I was preparing again,
Mhm.
with your podcast, with Dr. Rachel Reed's book. Because I reread all the material that I had read the first time around, which were mainly Ina May Gaskin's books. And
Mhm.
I realized and recognized what I had heard you say of how much she is driven by the medical model anyway.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, like it was just like this other level of awareness. And I was just like, whoa. And the conception of this baby was also very conscious. And we did a ceremony because we had tried to get pregnant since my baby turned 2,
Mm.
but I had lactational amenorrhea until she turned 3.
Mm.
So I did not get pregnant until after she turned 3. And so as my period returned, and I got my second cycle and my third cycle, and we were like, okay, it was right around the summer solstice, and we celebrate the change of the seasons in our family. And so we did this, with the guidance of my spiritual teacher, from Colombia. We did the ceremony for the sun. So we gathered all this, uh, plants and fruits and light and tobacco and like all these things, and created an altar. And after we put our baby to sleep, we did this ceremony for the sun, and we asked the sun for a baby, and I got pregnant right then. Like a week or two later, I got pregnant. And so again, it was a renewed sense of like, okay, this is meant for me. This is and again, asking for intervention. And this time the conversation was with the sun, and asking the sun for intervention of a child.
I love
And
that. Like, I mean, maybe everyone is like hearing this, but the earth gave you a daughter and the sun gave you a son.
yeah, yes. It was
That
literally
touches
like
in my heart.
it was literally like that. Yeah.
Aw.
And so, yeah, and so throughout the pregnancy, it was like this reawakening and this like I'm an academic. Yeah, so I'm an artist, but I also work in academia. I'm a university professor, and so I'm a nerd in all things, everything that I'm into. I just go dive in head first, and I need to do all the things and read all the books. And I really love learning, and I want to like read all the stuff. And yeah, and then there was a moment in my pregnancy when I was reaching 36 weeks. I can't remember if it was my 30, it was a 35 or a 36-week checkup, that my midwife found my baby in transverse position. And she said, it's like, okay, we want to turn the baby, but the baby can turn on its own. Talk to the baby, but I want you to maybe get it checked out in an ultrasound to confirm which side the head is on, so that if we do need to do any manual rotation, we know which way to go.
Was this the same midwife or did you hire a new midwife?
No. So yeah, I ended up hiring my doula, which she trained to become a midwife in the time that I had between pregnancies. And I had I have a really lovely relationship with her, and just energetically she felt like the right person. And she, and I was like, as soon as I got pregnant, it's like, I know who's going to be with, like, I knew. And still throughout the process, I started hearing all these women in your podcast talk about free birth, and I'm like, oh. So I started like considering free birth, and then I talked to my partner, and she just stared at me. I was like, I don't think I can do this. He was like, can we please just have the midwife there? And so I agreed for two reasons. One, my parents were going to be in town to take care of our daughter during the birth. And because we were birthing at home, I had to really think hard about the limits, the boundaries that I was going to set between me and my mom. Because my mom wears her feelings on her sleeve, and I did not want her to be making faces at anything, or to be making suggestions of when we needed to go to the hospital, or when, I just needed to create some form of barrier. And so like it was all very orchestrated of how, when I wrote my birth plan, I also wrote a birth plan for my parents, telling them what I wanted them to do, what I didn't want them to do, how I want them to protect the space, what I needed from them, which was primarily my daughter needs to be, I need to not be worried about my daughter. And I wanted my daughter to be able to be at the birth. So throughout my pregnancy, we were looking at natural birth videos with her. And so we were talking about the different phases of the birth, and how some mamas need to scream their babies out, some mamas can just breathe their babies out. Because she gets very nervous when I get hurt. Like literally I stub a toe and I scream, and she's like, what's happening, mama? Like she gets really stressed out. And so I was like, how is this going to work when I'm in the middle of labor? But we watched a lot of births, and I just trusted that she was going to be fine. And my fallback was my parents were going to be there. But anyway, like this moment where she found the baby in transverse position. Anyway, too many thoughts. So the thought process is like, if my parents are going to be here, a free birth for me is impossible, because they're just going to be not the energy that I need, like I wanted the idea of a free birth, of having no provider, like no, but I did want people there. I did want support,
Mm.
and so the idea that my parents would be there with how fearful they are of birth and how fearful they were of birthing outside of the hospital to begin with. And I just thought it was like, if nothing else, I need my midwives to be kind of my buffer and my sacred space holders.
Mhm.
Um, and I talked this through with my midwives, and I told them I want to have as close to a free birth as possible. And they were 100%, on board. And they told me, it was like, we have so much, like so much confidence in you that one of them would tell me, just call me when the baby's here. It's like, you got this, like but it was like night and day between how this midwives treated me and the previous one did, like just 100% trust in me and my body.
Mm.
Um, and so when this happened, she's like, my midwife was like, you can turn this baby, the baby can turn on its own, but I just want to keep close, eye on it. And given my previous experience with a hospital transfer, I was doing concurrent care with the nurse midwives in the hospital, meaning I was doing some prenatal visits with them as well, because if I was registered as a client,
Right.
then I wouldn't have this situation if I was transferred.
Right.
And so I was like, fine, whatever. And so I would go do that. So I was doing double prenatal visits, but it was just like the peace of mind. Like, I just don't want to have to deal with this at the hospital again.
Mm-mm.
Um, and that ended up working really well for me. And so right at 36 weeks after, so I had my prenatal here at home on a Wednesday, and I had scheduled one in the hospital on the Friday. And so she said, check, have her check where baby is. I just want someone else's opinion and see if I'm imagining this, or like, but I want to make sure before we move forward with anything. And given my personality, as this avid, academic and nerd, like I started like looking on the internet as like books about turning babies and like all this stuff. And then I got to a point where I stopped and I remembered my other midwife, that she's very grounded on Mexican indigenous practices for midwifery. She grabbed my hands and looked at my eyes and she said, you can let go of the books. You've read everything you've read. You've done everything you can do. It's time for you to trust your intuition. Go inside your body. You know you can do this.
Mm.
You can do this. You can have this baby right now.
Mm.
Let go of the books. And so
Mhm.
I was literally about to click buy. And this, I don't know if you're familiar with the Turning Babies website.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I was going to buy their book and like do the thing that I always do. And I was like, I'm not going to do this. And I just stepped away from the computer. And then I first had just this meltdown moment where I just cried and mourned the possibility of losing my home birth.
Mhm.
I just needed to do that to get that energy out of the way. And so
Mhm.
I cried hard for like 30 minutes. And then after that, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to do something about this. And then I just delved into my meditation practice. I meditated in the sun, and I asked the sun to help me turn the baby, because I know like this is your son. Help us turn the baby. I talked to the baby. I asked him to turn. I did some yoga postures and did some yoga, some of my yoga practice in the morning. And I just spent basically not quite 48 hours, but like 36 hours in just like deep awareness, intention, just really going deeply within, trusting my body, talking to baby. And then when I went in the morning on Friday and I talked to my nurse midwife there, she was touching me and she's like, she said that that the baby was transfused, and I said, huh. And she was like, I'm gonna go get a scanner,
Mhm.
ultrasound device right now. And she just puts it right on my pelvis and she's like, there's a head. There's the
Mm.
head. I felt the head right there. You're fine. Baby's fine.
Mm.
Baby's head down. She's like, good work, mama. Like, just do all
Yeah.
the things that you're doing. You've got this. That was my last appointment at the hospital. I was like,
Mm.
I don't need to come back here. I have everything
Yeah.
I need to birth this baby. And that experience was incredible in preparing me for the birth. I was like, I can do this. Like, I can take responsibility and trust my body and go deep in
Mm,
rather than keep reaching out for
mm.
people to help me. I heard a lot of women in your podcast talk about like how you really are the expert in your birth and your body because it's your body.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that was so important for me to have had that experience, to be able
Mm,
to have this moment of mourning the possible loss
mhm.
and getting that energy, that doubt out. And
Yeah.
then from then on, I just moved full head on with trust and gratitude and I just knew that baby was going to be born at home.
Mm, beautiful.
Um, yeah.
So let's dive on into your birth story.
Yeah. So I didn't know what to expect because I didn't experience
Spontaneous.
spontaneous labor, right? And so
Hmm.
I was like, I don't know. Like I was excited and like, I didn't know. And there was a moment, like a lot of women in the US have to do because we don't have paid leave. So there's a way in which the system, if you have accrued sick leave, you can get some chunk of the unpaid leave paid, and they force you to do that first. And then our university has this way of donating time. So my partner, who's also a professor, was able to donate me some of his time so that I was able to take a full blown leave with pay. But I mean, a full blown leave, like 12 weeks, like it's ridiculous, but
Yeah.
that's what I mean by that. But when I was thinking, of course, I want to maximize the time with my baby. I'm just going to work until I go into labor. That was my plan. And then after listening to your podcast and so many women say, like, no, you need to relax
Yeah.
in leading coming up to your birth. You need to take time off. You need to.
Yeah.
And I was like, and especially after this experience with with a transverse baby and flipping the baby. And I was like, this is what I need to do.
Mm.
Like this is the work that I need to be doing right now. And so I went on leave right when I had said I was going to go on leave, even though I had no signs of labor yet. And I was just like, I'm on leave. I'm going to take time to be with my baby girl, to do yoga, to walk, to meditate, to nourish my body. I'm just going to prepare for birth.
Mm.
And that was a Monday. It was my first day off. So my first day off was the Friday before. But so
Yeah.
I was just really just talking to baby every night. I was doing this massages on my belly and like baby, talking to baby, come down, head down towards my pelvis, face mommy's back, doing all the things and feeling really good. And I was getting a lot of Braxton Hicks, but they would come and go and they weren't intense. And then that week that I started to leave on Wednesday, my midwife came to do the prenatal check. And she later told me that she found the head so far down in the pelvis, she knew I was going to go into labor that night. But
Mm.
she didn't tell me anything. She was like, just let me know if anything happens. And I started the Braxton Hicks around 7 or 8 p.m. that evening, but I had been having them at night for several days and then they would go away. And then I woke up around 11 p.m. and they were still there. So I was like, well, if this is labor, I'm going to go eat because I don't want to be hungry. And so I ate a little bit, went back to bed around 1, texted my midwife, just, hey, my contractions are still there. I'll let you know if anything happens. Woke up around 6 in the morning. Contractions were still there. Texted my midwife. Contractions are still there, pretty mild. They're regular, but really far apart. Everyone woke up. We started, I told my partners, like, I'm having these contractions. They're not leaving. This might be it. Maybe let's keep our baby home from school because I don't want to have to go get her when I realize that I'm actually in labor because I really wanted her to be present. And it
Mm.
was like Holy Week, I guess, so it was the week of Easter.
Mhm.
And so this was Thursday of
Mm.
Easter week. Um, and so it was the last day of school she had because they had Friday off. And so I just told him, just let's just keep her at home, even if it's not it doesn't matter. She's going to have a long weekend anyway.
Mm.
And so that morning, contractions slowed down a little bit. And so then I was like, okay, is this false labor or is that a thing or is this normal? And my midwife is like, just have a normal day, as normal as you can. It's normal for things to stop and go. It's like, just try to have a normal day. You're doing fine. I'm like, okay. Then we prepared smoothies, we inflated the birth pool, we prepared the bed, we did all the things. And I tried to take a nap in the morning. I couldn't sleep. And so I just told them, let's just go on a walk before lunch. The weather's beautiful. It had been horrible weather. We get really intense dust storms here because we're in the desert. And so in the spring, there's some days that is like really nasty. And so we had like 3 or 4 days of just dust, blowing dust. And that day was just clear and sunny and beautiful. And I just like, let's just go for a walk. And we went for a walk in the park and everything just seemed brighter and like beautiful. And I was feeling the contractions and we were walking. Flowers were blooming, like everything felt very beautiful. And like, at one point my partner says like, it's a great day to have a baby. And I told him, yes, it is. It's beautiful. And towards the end of our walk, I was having to bear down and like breathe through my contractions. And so my partner is like, let's just go home. We went home. I was not able to eat lunch. I was getting a little nauseous. And I just told him I want to jump in the shower because I remembered how good that felt the first birth.
Mm.
We came out of the shower, but I was still thinking like we're still ways away because it's still, with my other, I took so long and I just didn't want to get excited. And so I was like, so we were still talking about, he was like, maybe I'll take, our daughter, River Luna, to the library and get some books and then come back and like, sure, yeah, I'll be fine. And then we got out of the shower and I'm like, well, why don't we just time the contractions? I'm curious to see how they're going. And by the time we were done, so we timed it for about an hour. And by the time we were done, I was like, you cannot leave me alone. Like I need you. Like it was very evident at that point that I was in active labor. And I was like, I need you to press on my hips now. And so it all happened really quickly. And so, I'm talking about we went on a walk around noon, came back and ate lunch around 1, started timing contractions around 2. And by 3 p.m., I was like, I know I'm in active labor. Um, and I lost part of my mucus plug and like things were just really picking up. And so I told him, it's like, just tell our midwife that I'm pretty sure that this is in high gear now and that we're probably going to need her soon. And so he texted her, and like 15 minutes later, I was like, okay, I need her now. It's just like I just want the space to be held. I want her to be here. Start inflating the birth pool. And so we started like doing all this. My midwife ended up arriving at like 5 or a little bit after 5 p.m. And my baby was born at 6:16. And then the second midwife didn't arrive until like 5:45. So it was all like really like they were kind of like getting their things together and like it was all very still and it was very exquisite at the time. But I also didn't expect my baby to be born during the day. I just thought that the baby was my daughter was born at 12:53 a.m., like in the middle of the night. And I was born at 3 a.m. My brother was born at midnight. I don't know. It's like babies are born in the middle of the night. That's when women are relaxed. And like, so I never thought that I would have the baby during the day. So it was also kind of disorienting that there was light out, and there was a moment where I'm like, oh, I'm getting a little lightheaded. And it's like, oh, maybe I should have one of the smoothies, thinking again that I was still going to have all this time. And then they got to a point where the birth pool was filled, but it was not warm enough. And so they were trying to bring boiling water to try to warm it up and stuff. And it got to the point where I said, I don't care how the water is. I need the water now. I'm going to get in the pool. I don't care. And so I got in the pool. They kept trying to warm it up. And that's where I felt like I hit transition because there was a moment, and this was a goal of mine. There was one moment in my first birth where I said, I can't. And like, I knew I wanted to stay positive with my language because I know that words are very powerful. And so when I hit that moment, I just said, I'm I'm needing support. I'm needing support. I was like, I need support right now. And so my daughter came in at that time. She
Oh.
jumped in the pool with me. That was her dream, to be in the pool with me. She jumped in the pool, didn't quite, the water was cold. So she's like, oh, I went out. So she came out, and then my partner was out holding her over the pool, holding my hands. My daughter was patting me on the head saying, you can do it, mama. You can do it. It's very serious, sweet. And then, my partner, had read with me that laughing helps relax the body. So he's like,
Yeah.
my daughter had just learned knock knock jokes. So he was like, oh, tell mommy a joke, tell mommy a joke. And so she told me a knock knock joke and made me laugh. And like we all laughed. And it was kind of like a moment of release. And then I told my midwife, I have the urge to push. I'm going to push. And she's like, push your baby. You're not waiting for anything. You're ready. You've got this. Um, and I remember I was kneeling. It's so funny because I was thinking about all these positions and hearing all the women in your podcast. And I was like, oh, I think I want to try this position. And it was all instinctual for me. I ended up birthing on my knees, which that was not a position in my list of positions to try, but it was just what felt good. And I was bracing with one hand on the birthing pool wall and the other hand on the floor. And so I was like pushing, feeling like the sensation of my breath and my vocalization and the push going down, and just talking to baby and vocalizing and I checked and I felt the head, and the midwife said, "It's like, oh, can you feel the head?" And I said, "Yeah, but there's something soft in between." And she's like, "Oh, that's probably your membranes. That's totally fine." I pushed one more time. So that was after the first push. Second push came, and I heard the water pop, which I had heard so many women in your podcast talk about it. And I was like, that's the water. It was so exciting because it was like something that I recognized. I was like, that's the water. It's like, and I touched again, and it's like, now I felt the full head. And I was like, yeah, I feel the head. And she was like, oh, I'm curious, how far in do you feel it? My midwife asked, and it was like about this, like half a finger. So she knew it was really close. I still thought that I had, because I pushed for so long the first time. And she's like, you're doing great. You've got this, and I pushed again. And then I felt the ring of fire, and I was like, oh, whoa. And then I kind of stopped and I touched, and the head was out. And I'm like, what? The head is out. And like, I really wanted to birth the head first because I didn't want to tear this time. And I know that if I birth the baby slowly, it would lessen the chances of me tearing. And it just blew my mind that in, 3 or 4 pushes, the baby head was already out. And I was like, wow, the baby head's out. And so my other midwife just like, okay, so now just birth the rest of the baby, just birth the body. I'm like, okay. Just, you know, birth, like in the next contraction, I pushed and then the baby came out. I caught it, I caught him. I put him on my chest. My daughter jumped in the water and hovered over the baby. And I was just, oh my God, like I had the baby, like the midwives never touched me, never checked me, never, they were just holding space. The only thing that my midwife was doing while I was pushing was putting her hand on my sacrum. And that just helped me release some of the pressure. But it's like I never got a cervical check. I never got, like there was nothing. It was just me and I had no doubt that I was going to be able to do it. I was not, it was just, it was blew my mind. And like, I was in tears, of course. And I was just like, I had the birth of my dreams. Like I birthed in water, I birthed at home. My other baby is here with me. It was just incredible. And I didn't tear. It was just amazing. It was just such a redemptive birth and such an empowering experience. And I think the biggest thing that helped me achieve that was taking responsibility for the birth. And like I knew, and I told this to my midwives, it's like, I know that everything has risks, and this baby is going to be born at home because I know that the risks of going to the hospital are greater than whatever can happen at home. And I'm taking responsibility for that. And I told them, I want you to know that I'm taking responsibility for that choice. And I'm I want to be sovereign in this birth, and that's the choice that I'm making. And after the fact, one of my midwives told me, it's like, when you said that, that's when I knew I could step away, and that you were going to be fine, that you were not going to need us there. Because she was like, to hear a woman say that they're taking responsibility for their birth is very rare. And it was just, I would have not been able to do that without the wisdom of the women in your podcast and all the stuff that I've heard from you and things that you suggested in the podcast. But yeah, it was just incredible, an incredible, incredible experience.
I love that. That is the ideal client. If you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby, and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdom would you give to her? I have a little puppy who's like waking up here and wants to play.
Waking up, ready to be with you. One of the things that was told to me before my first birth, that was really important, and that I wholeheartedly encourage any new mama to believe and to work on believing, is that you already have everything you need to have this baby.
Yeah.
There's nothing else. You don't need anything else, anyone else, or anything else. You have already right now, you have everything you need to birth this baby. Believing that was life-changing for me.
That is the truth, isn't it?
And it is the truth. That's the thing. It's like women have birthed like this for thousands and thousands of years. It's like, we can do this. We don't need the hospitals. We don't need the midwives. We don't need the, IVs. We don't need the drugs. We don't need our body produces all that. Our body produces everything we need. And then the other pearl of wisdom that comes from my second birth is, again, what my midwife told me, of let go of outside knowledge and go within. Develop your intuition, develop trust in yourself, trust in your body, because that is the only thing that you're going to be able to draw from in the moment of the birth, is what you have within and what you can develop within yourself. And take responsibility for the birth, without fear, but kind of with that trust that things are going to work in the way that they're meant to work. That was the most empowering thing. And I think, looking back, I was not ready to take responsibility for my birth the first time. And having the second birth was like, whoa, like really taking responsibility for the choices I was making, and wanting that baby to be born at home, knowing what that baby was going to be at home, and being ready to accept whatever consequences came with that decision, knowing that going to a hospital came with a lot of other outcomes that I think are more harmful for me and the baby than whatever could be happening at home. And of course, I, took that responsibility, knowing that I had a healthy pregnancy, I had a low risk pregnancy, like all this, things. I didn't have any complications coming in, but that also was very key for me.
Beautiful. I love that so much. And it is key. I absolutely love and adore your story. It's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. My puppy says at 2 hours mark, this is enough.
I get it.
So here he is. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love the pearls of wisdoms. I love your birth stories. There's so much, for women to take away from that. So many pearls of wisdoms. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing it with us.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you for creating this resource, and everything that you do it's really inspiring me to move a new direction with my career and the community work that I do. And so it's been really exciting. So
exciting. Watch this space, hey?
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Paola.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as the Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.